Welcome to Holstein Connections, where we share the latest stories, insights, and news from Holstein Association USA and beyond. The largest dairy cattle breed association in the world, Holstein Association USA provides leadership, information, and services to help dairy producers worldwide be successful. Whether you're in the barn, on the road, or just tuning in for your dose of dairy news, we're glad you're here. This is Holstein Connections. Hello, everyone. Today we are excited to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Bewley to the podcast. I'm your host, Emily Bosch, and Dr. Bewley, Executive Director of Genetic Programs and Innovation, is joining me today to give us some insight on the Million Reasons Why Conformation Matters study. Jeffrey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Emily. Happy to be here.
Before we dive into the Million Reasons Why Conformation Matters study, why don't you introduce yourself and your position with the Holstein Association?
Yes, my name's Jeffrey Bewley, and I'm Executive Director of Genetics and Innovation with Holstein Association. My role is to oversee our genetics team and genetics efforts, along with our efforts in data analysis.
So, Jeffrey, there's a lot of healthy debate about the conformation of dairy cows, what traits are really important, and how much that matters. What did the study find about this topic?
It was really interesting, Emily. I honestly came into this a little bit skeptical. I grew up on a gray dairy farm. We didn't have registered animals, and I really didn't think a lot about conformation. Growing up, that's just not something we talked about. So when the idea first came about to do this study, I was skeptical we would find a lot. But I was really surprised that we did find a lot of really interesting information about the importance of conformation relative to economically important indicators like lifetime energy corrected milk and longevity, and of course, first lactation energy corrected milk also. So those are things that are very important to the bottom line for a dairy producer. And we were able to demonstrate that there are quite a bit of information related to those important outcomes.
Before we dive into some of that specific information and results that you found, take us back to the beginning of the research project. How did the idea come about? How did it start?
The idea was Lindsay Warden's, actually. Lindsay came to me and asked if we could do this analysis, and I said, yes, if we have the data, we can do that. So we had the data. We had all the conformation data and classification data from our own data set, but we also had related information from DHIA on a lot of animals. So we were able to combine those two data sets to be able to compare the two pieces of information.
Jeffrey, where did the name A Million Reasons Why Conformation Matters come from? I know it's connected to the data set and the amount of cows that you had in it. Tell us a little bit about that and then how that data was analyzed.
So it's because there were 1 million cows in the study, and then we just thought conformation is important, and then the two kind of came together, and it became the Million Reasons Why study, because it's 1 million cows, and that's a really powerful data set.
And what was the overarching goal of the research project?
The overarching goal was to quantify where conformation is important and perhaps which conformation traits were the most related to some of these economically important indicators.
And what were your findings about how physical conformation impacts things like longevity and lifetime production of dairy cows?
So really interesting that when we looked at this, and we looked at it a few different ways, but first of all, we compared the first score in the first lactation for a cow compared to, let's say, first lactation energy corrected milk. And then we did the same thing for lifetime energy corrected milk, and we did the same thing for longevity. And in each case, we were able to show that every category of scores resulted in an increase in production or longevity. For example, when we look at first lactation energy corrected milk, the cows that were scored 85 to 89 on their first lactation score produced almost 25,000 pounds of energy corrected milk, compared to the cows that were 80 to 84 that produced a little over 24,000. So there was about 600 pounds difference in production between those two categories. And then it just stair stepped on down all the way down to the ones that were less than 60, who produced a little less than 23,000 pounds of milk. Ultimately, that means when we compare the top category to the bottom category, there was an 1,800 pound difference in production in the first lactation. And if we look at that and we can assume a long-term milk price of $20 a hundredweight, that's $360 difference in milk revenue in that lactation between the animals that are most conformationally correct and the ones that are least conformationally correct. And then again, the stages between those scores stair step between the bottom score to the top score.
And so that was just for first lactation, right? So over time, this can potentially have even more of an economic impact for dairy farmers.
Exactly. And actually, the results are more striking when we look at lifetime energy corrected milk. So using that same comparison, when we take that group that's 85 to 89, their average lifetime energy corrected milk production was about 86,500. Then that next group down, the 80 to 84, they were a little less than 79,500. So about 6,000 pound difference between those two top categories in lifetime energy corrected milk. And then we see that same pattern, that stair step down pattern as we go down in first lactation score to the point that those animals that were less than 60 produced a little less than 58,000 pounds of milk. So between the top category and the bottom category, there's almost a 29,000 pound difference in lifetime energy corrected milk. And again, if we take a $20 long-term milk price, that's $5,700 difference in milk revenue between the animals that were most conformationally correct versus the ones that were least conformationally correct.
That's certainly a significant economic impact, especially over time. So generally speaking, right, we're seeing that correlation between the better the conformation, the higher the milk production. But are there any specific traits that you found that most significantly affected longevity and production, the ones that farmers should maybe be paying special attention to when it comes to their breeding decisions and how that correlates to production?
Yes, there were. So we also ranked individual linear traits. We looked at the correlation between individual linear traits and culling age, for example. And in that, we found that the trait that was the most highly correlated with culling age was foreudder attachment. So the foreudder attachment is generally associated with cows staying in the herd longer. A stronger foreudder attachment means that animal will likely stay in the herd longer. Then other traits that were reasonably correlated with culling age were rear udder height, udder depth, a more shallow udder, rear udder width, a wider rear udder, and then foot angle, so better feet and legs, thorough width, and dairy form. That dairy form is likely related to animal producing more milk, so they're more likely to stay in the herd because they're producing more milk. So those were the traits that were the most related to culling age in days. And then if we extend that to lifetime energy corrected milk, which I think is probably the most interesting metric, because we're saying not only do they last longer, but they're producing more milk and more components of milk across their lifetime, then those rankings change. They're similar, but the rankings change. So the two that were the most correlated with lifetime energy corrected milk were rear udder width and rear udder height. So higher, wider rear udders, followed by foreudder attachment. Again, those animals are staying in the herd longer. Dairy form, foot angle, and udder cleft. So those are the traits that I think we could say were the most related to lifetime energy corrected milk based on this data set. And I want to step back too and just talk a little bit about the data set itself. So the data set is really a powerful data set. We had all that data for a period of about 20 years. And what we were able to do is combine that data so we could do some statistical analysis. And in the end, when we edited the data, we ended up with about 1 million cows. 1 million cows in a data set. That's a huge data set with a lot of meaningful information coming from it. in over 5,000 herds. So it's not like this is 2 or 3 herds. This is 5,000 herds, a million cows over 20 years. And I should say also, we did edit the data. What I mean by editing the data was we wanted to make sure we had the best data possible in the data set. And we wanted to minimize the opportunities for preferential treatment of animals and bias. So one of the things that we did to do that is we ensured that every animal that remained in the final data set that was included in the statistical analysis had to have had at least 5 herd mates, calf, in that season, in that year, in that herd. So what that effectively does is it really reduces the data set to mostly animals in larger herds. This is not a lot of animals coming from 30 or 40 or 50 cow herds. Most animals in the data set are from multiple hundred or 1,000 cow herds, where we're probably less likely to see some of that bias.
Absolutely. And I assume that these million cows, these 5,000 herds over 20 years, were all from different areas of the country, different climates as well. So you had some different representation in those terms.
That's right. They were all over the country.
Ready to take your leadership skills to the next level? Applications for the Young Dairy Leaders Institute are now available. Known widely as YDLI, the engaging hands-on program is open to young adults ages 22 to 45 with a keen interest in the dairy industry. YDLI takes place over 1 year, including 2 face-to-face meetings focused on interpersonal communications, advocacy, community involvement, and more. A Holstein Foundation program, YDLI applications are due August 1st and can be found online at holsteinfoundation.org. That's HOLSTEINFOUNDATION.org.
So going back to those findings that you mentioned, how some of those traits impact lifetime energy corrected milk, I think a lot of those make logical sense, right? The things about the udder, foot angle. Did you find anything, or did you look at all about how some of those udder traits or overall conformation scores might impact things like somatic cell score and how that plays into the overall picture of a dairy cow's production?
We did look at somatic cell score, and I will say in the beginning, the correlations were much smaller for somatic cell score, and that's probably not all that surprising when you consider all the things that affect somatic cell score. And in general, of course, we're going to aim for lower somatic cell scores. So the correlations that are meaningful are actually negative. So if we have a better udder cleft, for example, then that means a lower somatic cell score. So the traits that were most important for somatic cell score were all udder traits. It was udder depth, fore udder attachment, udder cleft, and front teat placement. Those were the traits that were most correlated with somatic cell score in a positive manner, meaning a lower somatic cell score. I'll say again, though, those are much smaller correlations. So I don't think we can interpret a lot into that other than to say that if we're selecting for conformationally correct udders, we're likely to have a positive impact on somatic cell score.
Sure, that absolutely makes sense. I know that you spent a lot of time looking at specific traits, different traits, how they impacted different things. Are there any other specific traits or findings that come to mind that you thought were maybe surprising or interesting or just really useful information for dairy producers to have?
So I think we should start by saying the overall message is that conformation is important to having animals that produce a lot of milk over a long period of time. There's a lot of debate in the industry about conformation, and some people say maybe conformation doesn't matter as much today because we've bred such a nice cow, and it is amazing. The Holstein cow today on every herd around the world is really quite amazing when you think how far we've come in terms of conformation. But I think the risk that we have there is if we don't continue to focus on conformation, we may make mistakes or go backwards on conformation. And I think this data set very clearly says this is still important, still something that we need to continue to look at in our selection. And I think back to my dairy judging days and my coach, Dr. George Hershey from the University of Kentucky. He always talked about breeding animals that were conformationally correct. Not necessarily fancy, but conformationally correct. And I think this data set really drives that point home, that the traits that are most important for our economically important indicators are the udder traits and the feet and leg traits. Those are the things that are most important to breeding an animal that stays in the herd for a long time and produces a lot of milk. The body traits really didn't come out as strong. So those relationships are not nearly as strong as we talk about the udder traits and the feet and leg traits. And then another thing I think that was interesting, another trait that was interesting in this data set was stature. So stature, actually, if we looked at first lactation energy corrected milk, taller cows tend to produce more milk in their first lactation. But when we change that question to look at lifetime energy corrected milk, it's actually the opposite. So the taller cows don't stay in the herd as long. So I think that we have to be careful in thinking about stature and probably not continuing to breed a taller animal.
Absolutely. So the bottom line there, conformation is important, and there are certain traits like udder traits and feet and leg traits where you found were more significant in how they impacted the cow's overall production and longevity. So Jeffrey, how can dairy farmers use the information that you shared here today? What are the take-home action steps or messages as they look at breeding their herd and continuing to improve and breeding better cows?
To me, first of all, I think this says that we should continue to look at conformation as we do our bull selection and our mating decisions. That we shouldn't just completely take the approach that conformation doesn't matter. Do we need to breed extremely fancy animals or show type animals? I think sometimes that's where people get confused about conformation, that they think, well, I'm not breeding a show cow. We're not talking about breeding a show cow here. We're talking about breeding an animal that's conformationally correct to be able to last a long time and produce a lot of milk. And I think it says we still need to look at those things. And we need to think perhaps a bit more about the udder and the feet and leg traits in that selection. So in the bull selection, to continue to look at those traits and not take that foot off the gas, so to speak, from how we work on continuing to improve the cow's udder or the cow's feet and legs.
How do Holstein Association USA's classification services play into that? It's not just for people who are breeding those high type show cows or taking their animals to the show ring. How can a dairy farmer who just wants good cows utilize those programs to make decisions?
Conformation analysis through classification provides the data that we need to be able to continue to do this kind of analysis across time. So we should have a checkpoint every few years to make sure these relationships are the same and make sure that our breed is headed in the right direction. And in fact, Holstein Association has committees made of dairy producers that focus just on that issue. So this is a constant discussion that we have every year. We're always looking at continuous improvement. It's a very important part of our association and continued development of the breed. Within that, I think then just the show ring. And the show ring is an important part of our industry. But it's also important to continually think about breeding functionally correct animals with good udders and good feet and legs so that we can have animals that last a long time and produce a lot of milk. We're in an amazing point in development of the Holstein breed, but we're always looking to continually improve that animal, and all of this kind of discussion helps us to get to that point.
It's really amazing to look back at pictures of the progress of the Holstein cow itself over the past 10, 20, 50, 100 years, right? She has changed quite a bit for the better, I think. So Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me. Before we wrap up here today, I thought it would be fun to get to know you a little better with 5 rapid fire would you rather questions. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Jeffrey, chocolate milk or strawberry milk?
Chocolate.
It's hard to go wrong there. I know you're also a technology guy, Jeffrey, but would you rather milk with robots or in a milking parlor?
I grew up in a parlor and I really enjoyed the milking process, so I probably lean a little bit more that direction, but that's easy for me to say, not being the one that has to do that anymore.
Absolutely. Jeffrey, barn cat or farm dog?
I am a cat person. We have cats at home.
And I know that you do help out from time to time at the WKU Smart Holstein Lab as part of your role there. You do spend some time on the farm, but do you prefer field work or barn chores?
Barn chores. I'm a cow guy, not a crop guy.
And then final one here, cheddar mozzarella cheese.
Cheddar. Extra sharp.
Extra sharp. Me too, Jeffrey. Again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. And I know that you have lots of information on the Conformation Matter study, more visuals and charts. Where can people go if they want to look at some of that and take a little bit closer, deep dive into the information themselves?
We have a lot of information. We looked at this data in a lot of different ways, and there are hundreds of graphs, actually, if you really want to delve into it. On our website, if you go to the homepage, there's a link on the lower right that says the million reasons why confirmation matters, and you can go there and look at all of this information in great detail.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Thanks for listening to this episode of Holstein Connections. Whether you're in the barn, on the road, or just tuning in for your dose of dairy news, we're glad you're here. Until next time, this is Holstein Connections.